Does silence make you just a little uncomfortable? Sandy and I were watching a TV show last night, and it's a science fiction show of things that happened 200 years in the future, and they make a joke about even 200 years in the future, thousands of light years from Earth, people are nervous standing in a public elevator. You're standing there with a whole bunch of people not saying a word, all looking the same direction. There's something about silence that bothers us. I mean, not to tease anybody, but even so, here I was being silent, and somebody had to say something, right? You know, amen. Now, I'm not known for being particularly silent. Even Sandy has said at times in the house, "Can you just be quiet?" I said, "I'm not saying anything." She goes, "Yeah, but you're humming, you're whistling, you're tapping on something." I think my dog knows Chinese so well because I was always practicing on him, always talking to my dog. But there is a spiritual discipline of silence. It has to do with our solitude that we're talking about. There is a need for us to remain silent. Not just a right to remain silent, a need to remain silent. Most people in this world, to put it in the terms of radios, most people in this world are transmitters. You see, somewhere around here, some of you listen to the Chanute radio, some of you listen to Parsons radio. There's a transmitter, and it sends out a signal. And you have a radio at home that is a receiver, and it listens to that signal, and you cannot use that receiver to talk back to the DJ or the announcer because it's a one-way signal. And what we learn in radio science, if you've ever studied, ham radio or any kind of radio, even the walkie-talkie, even the cell phone, it has to have two radios inside. One is the receiver and one is the transmitter. And even though they're both working at the same time, so we can have a conversation, they are two different radios. And most people are radios in the sense that they are either transmitters or they're receivers. And in order to be a receiver, you have to literally turn off the transmitter and turn on the receiver. The receiver is silence. You've had those conversations with people where you can just see the look on their face that they're not listening to what you're saying. They're trying to wait for you to stop so they can tell you what they want to say. Silence is that spiritual discipline in which we turn on the receiver and stop transmitting. Remember that Christian calisthenics comes from the word calisthenic that means to exercise the body with a daily regimen of things that don't require equipment, don't require particularly special training, but things that you should do every day so that your body is at its best for normal kinds of effort. The things you grew up with, the push-ups, the jumping jacks, the squat thrusts, all those things you hated, but you knew that these were the bare minimum of having a healthy athletic body. Well, spiritual disciplines are the calisthenics of the Spirit. These are things that we should be doing, even if they're kind of a labor. We discipline ourselves. That's why we use that word discipline. We force ourselves to do these things because they are healthy. And, like we've been saying for a couple of weeks now, that Satan's only power against us are lies, noise, hurry, and crowds. Satan literally does not have the ability to force you to do anything. But, he's good at lying. And he's so good at making you tired of all the noise, tired of all the business of hurry, and getting sick of all the opinions of the crowd. God has given you a blessed tool, a blessed discipline for dealing with all of that right there. But it's so uncomfortable. I had seriously considered doing this entire 25-minute sermon without saying a word. But you know what? It's just too uncomfortable. This silence is sometimes something that takes a while. I wake up every morning, which I had a doctor once told me, Michael, to really improve your attitude and improve your maturity, you should do 2 things every day that you hate to do. And I said, I already do. I go to bed and I wake up. I hate going to bed and I hate waking up. It takes me 30 minutes to wake up. And Sandy's going to cringe and say, no, it doesn't. It takes you 40. There's got to be that cup of coffee. There's got to be that, wiggling the toes by the bedside and the slow moans and the sound of Rice Krispies in your bones as you get up. Silence is the same way. Sometimes it takes us 30 or 40 minutes to finally stop talking to ourselves, talking to the rocks, talking to the dog, and just be silent. Now, for those of you who are afraid of being silent, it's because we've equated silence with some things that it doesn't really belong to. First of all, it's to go from loneliness to solitude by yourself. Silence is not about loneliness or being alone. Silence is about peace and solitude in any situation. Whether you're silent alone or whether you're silent with a group of people is still the solitude we're looking for. It is escape from the constant inane words. I think I was happier watching the news in Taiwan than I was in America because I didn't understand a word they were saying. And I could put any captions on the pictures I was watching. Sandy and I'd sit there sometimes and I'd come up with the funniest dialogue between the 2 people talking, And now I got to actually hear what they're saying. And it's just, I haven't actually watched the news in a week because it's just so inane. If you're going to be on the news 24 hours, don't you think you could have something else to talk about than 2 objects for 24 hours? Isn't there other things going on in the world, and we got to hear the same opinion all day long? Silence is your escape from the inane opinions and ideas of people that haven't spent 2 minutes actually thinking about it. They're either just blurting off their mouth or they're repeating what other people have said. It's time for us to just turn it off. Also, loneliness is empty. Clearly it's empty. I don't know why it's so empty, but it's empty. Well, that's weird. Well, loneliness is empty. Just take my word for it. If you are lonely, you feel empty even when you're in a crowd. When you're lonely, you can be in the middle of a shopping mall with everybody around you laughing and having fun, and you don't care. You don't think anybody understands you. You wish that you had somebody to talk to that understood what was going on, but that's just loneliness. I'm going to just take a moment here to turn off something and see if we can get something started again. Okay. And technology is a good opportunity to be quiet and silent. There we go. Well, that's not exactly what I wanted you to see. It thinks I'm driving. I don't know why it thinks I'm driving. There we go. Okay, silence is not about loneliness. It's about peace. It is an escape from the constant inane words of this world that probably come from Satan in some form because they're disheartening and they're wrong. And loneliness is not emptiness. Loneliness is emptiness. Solitude is actually fulfillment. In loneliness, you're lonely whether you're in a crowd or not in a crowd. In solitude, you're at peace whether you're in a crowd or when you're not in a crowd. And this is the kind of silence that we're looking for. Let me give you some biblical examples of silence. Ecclesiastes 3:7, there is a time to be silent and a time to speak. Pretty obvious, isn't it? Every teacher knows this. There is a time to be silent. Right? Every husband should know this. Even a yes, dear, will be taken the wrong way. It's just time to be silent. This is Solomon's observation. There is literally, in everyone's life, an equal time to speaking that is not speaking. Proverbs 25:11 says, "A word fitly spoken is like apples of gold in setting of silver." What he's saying there is, think about what you're going to say before you say it. We're full of a world of people that are put on the spot all the time. What's your opinion right now, yes or no? And we're so full of giving answers quickly. We just need to stop and think. Sandy and I used to do missions work on the Navajo reservation. Sometimes for me it was infuriating. I'd go into a home and we'd all sit down around with our Bibles, and it'd be 15 seconds, 30 seconds, 2 minutes before somebody said, "It's hot." Time would go by, and 2 minutes later somebody would say, "Yep." And sometimes it'd be 20 minutes or more before we got to the Bible study. It was because they didn't just want to rattle out useless words. They wanted to think about what they were going to talk about. Ecclesiastes 5:1 says, "Draw near to listen." It means to listen to God. To draw near to listen is better than to offer the sacrifice of fools. I'll give you a little question here. What do you think in this context is the sacrifice of fools? Any ideas? To listen to God is better than to offer the sacrifice of fools. What do you think the sacrifice of fools is? Well, I think, my opinion is, to just sit there and rattle off your opinion because somebody has to talk. It's better to draw near and listen to God. Do not be rash with your mouth, nor let your heart be hasty to utter a word before God. For God is in heaven and you are on the earth. Therefore, let your words be few. I've experienced this. Maybe some of you have. When you stand up before the judge, don't be filling in a whole bunch of ideas and opinions. You just tell him what the facts are, right? And your God is the king of the universe. He's not busy in the way we think of busyness, but he talks about how his word separates between spirit and soul. The idea there is that let's just cut the stuff out of the way and get to the fact of the matter. So think about what you're going to say. Consider it what it is you're going to say. And how do you do that? Matthew 17, verses 1 through 2. After 6 days, Jesus took Peter, James, and his brother John and led them up into the high mountain by themselves. He was transfigured in front of them. We've told this story already from a different point of view. Jesus picked some guys and says, let's go up and have this time together. And Jesus goes up on the mountain, and really he wants them to just sit there and listen. When he came down, Peter said to Jesus, "Look, it's good for us to be here. I will set up 3 shelters and blah, 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 and blah, blah, blah." And the Holy Spirit says, "Listen to Jesus." In other words, Peter, shut up. It's not time for you to be talking about your plans. It's time to listen. You see, one of the problems, I think, with the church today, and I mean the worldwide church, is we have lesson after lesson after lesson, book after book after book, sermon after sermon after sermon. And we have all kinds of meetings where we talk. How much time do we spend then listening? Going off by ourselves, or even with a group, but silently contemplating what it is that we have listened to. Some of you know the poet T.S. Eliot, an American who chose to live in Britain. He was also a Christian thinker. Not many people know that. He said, "Where shall the world be found? Where will the word resound? Not here. There is not enough silence." You ever heard somebody say that thing is so loud in here I can't even think? To T.S. Eliot, the whole world was so loud that you couldn't even think. What was Satan's power against you? Lies, noise, crowds. Solitude is not just a place, it is a state of mind, a state of your heart. It's something that we strive for in discipline. People, especially like me, who like to talk and like to teach, to say, I will not speak from this time to this time, and I'll be by myself and alone. We've talked about fasting, where we say, I don't need to eat, and there's no medical condition that will make me starve to death if I don't eat for 3 days. So I'm not going to eat. And we learn very quickly that we have a God living right here that talks louder than the God in heaven. Being silent is very similar. To just say, I'm not going to speak for an hour, for 2 hours. Don't try this at work. Your boss gets mad. Unless maybe you tell him ahead of time and he says, oh, good idea. If we possess inward solitude, we do not fear being alone, for we know that we are not alone. Neither do we fear being with others, for they do not control us. I see this so much now in our multimedia, social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram age, that people are hanging on that phone. Why? To learn something? No. How many likes did I get? How many notices? How many times have somebody said, wow, that's clever. You're so clever to share something that you didn't write. And we are sometimes devastated by the unkind word on Facebook. Look at that. I've got 42 people that like it and 17 comments about, wow, that's cool. And one person says, you're an idiot. And man, you're devastated. Solitude is saying, I'm not controlled by others' opinions, and I'm not worried about being alone in my beliefs. I'm okay, no matter what this world does. And there's none of this solitude without silence or a lack of screen. That's also very good. I don't know what's happening today, but I'm going to have to do a sermon on fasting from technology. Do you remember when the Apostle Paul in the book of Acts had to stop his sermon because the PowerPoint projector lost its energy? I might have to go back to that kind of, there we go. We'll see if that works. Okay. No solitude without silence. We must understand the connection between inner solitude and inner silence because they're inseparable. You can't sit there by yourself in the middle of nature and be worrying about your next paycheck and your bills and what your people think of you, because that's not the silence. It may be no noise, but it's not silence. This kind of silence is complete silence. It's not the stupidity of a rock that thinks of nothing, but it's the wisdom of a child loved by God who says, I'm only going to think about what God thinks of me right now, at this time. And therefore, I must listen to what he thinks of me. Now, silence is not a law where I say, I will not speak again for many years. We've all seen the monks, as maybe on TV, an order of monks who hasn't spoken in 20 years until some foreigner comes and stays with them for a while, and he's so obnoxious that finally one of them breaks their silence, because they're so mad at him. It's not a law. We're not talking about saying that you're going to take a vow of silence for a week. But Thomas à Kempis wrote, it is easier to be silent altogether than to speak with moderation. Let me put that in common everyday talk. It's a whole lot easier to shut up than to just speak a few words that matter. Because speaking a few words that matter in small amounts takes discipline more than it means to just shut up for a week. It's much easier to fast and not eat anything for a week than it is to only eat a very small amount of food at a potluck or at a buffet when you've paid all that money. Why do you go for the second and third plate? Man, I've paid for it. I need to get my money's worth. Silence is like this. Let's start with silence because it's a whole lot easier to start with a day of silence than it is to start forcing yourself to only speak a few words that matter. And once we've had some silence in our life, true silence, without worry, without thinking about other things, just enjoying the silence with God, maybe we will learn this idea of self-control, which is the whole idea. Sandy and I, when we were dating, we would drive the car an hour to see her folks, or we would drive the car an hour to go down to Kansas City for something. And we called those, in our first year of dating, we called that the truth serum, because it's funny how a long drive trapped in a car made all the truth come out. You know, she's over there blushing because I'm telling our secrets. Don't worry, she's been blushing for 29 years. And I remember that first day that we drove the car in almost total silence for an hour. We weren't mad. We weren't tired. We were just at peace. We knew each other. Do you remember that time with a good friend or someone you ended up marrying or just someone you really loved, that there was that time when you realized we've sat here for an hour and not said a word to each other, and that's okay? See, there's a certain amount of trust that love engenders in that silence. I'm comfortable with you. I don't have to control you with my words. I don't have to steer you in a certain direction with my voice. I'm just happy to be here with you. So what's the problem with silence? Why are we so uncomfortable with it? Well, one reason is that we can hardly bear to remain silent because we feel helpless in our silence. My mom once had throat surgery and she couldn't talk for a month. She bought one of those little kids deals with the plastic that you rip up to erase it with a little plastic stylus, and she'd tell people what she'd want. My goodness, she became a fast writer during that time. You try to go a few weeks without speaking and talk about helplessness. I've known people who said, I'd rather get stuck in a wheelchair than lose my ability to communicate. Tell people what you want. So in silence, we feel helpless, even before our loved ones and before God. If we're silent, who will take control of the situation? We feel like we have to be in control of the situation, and if we're not, someone that we trust has to be. So if we're silent, who will make sure things are taken care of and things are under control? Silence is intimately related to trust. If you can't trust the people in your situation, you have to say something. How many times have you said about someone to someone else that, oh, they've got a problem? Somebody has to say something. Well, maybe. Then again, maybe not. Silence is the freedom to let God be our justifier. We don't need to straighten out others. One of the worst things about Facebook and Instagram and Twitter and all these things is the number of people I know that spend hours and hours having to correct other people's opinions. I don't have that problem myself anymore. I've come to the conclusion, man, there's just no throwing pearls before swine. Arguing with some people because they've made up their mind. They're putting on Facebook. They say, this is my mind. And I say, okay. Don't have to correct them. Don't have to say you're wrong. Don't have to say, oh, well, here's another picture with a funny meme on it that will prove you wrong. Just let it go. Don't have to correct them. Because God's in control of this world and God's in control of my life, and I don't have to always win every argument. Just be smug and write in silence. If God's in control, I'll trust Him to be in control. Dietrich Bonhoeffer was a man who loved God and preached the Word of God at the beginning of his country turning to Adolf Hitler and Nazism. Dietrich Bonhoeffer saw that it was absolutely wrong, and he spoke it from the pulpit. And while he was in prison, he said, boy, if more of the preachers would have spoken up as they knew they were right, rather than be fearful and be silent, he still has something good to say about silence. Real silence, real stillness, really holding one's tongue comes only as the sober consequence of spiritual stillness. What is stillness? I'd rather take my boat out on a still water than a rough water. I'd rather swim in a still water than a rough water. I'd rather go to a family Thanksgiving dinner in stillness than in conflict. Stillness is a kind of peace. And it's only when we have received spiritual stillness that we can enjoy silence. Here is a man who, a pastor, decided to blow up Hitler. He was part of the group of people that put together a bomb and put it in a briefcase and put it under a desk where Hitler was supposed to be seated. And Hitler left at the last moment before the bomb went off, and he was arrested and put in prison and eventually executed. It was in prison that he learned that he was content in silence. Facing execution, facing torture, he wrote about the peace that he was in and how he enjoyed the silence because the silence told him God's heart, God's mind. The German soldiers that were taking care of him, first torturing him and then later, were touched by him as he would say to them as he was being led to his next interrogation, "Fritz, how are your kids? How's your wife? You told me that one of your kids was sick. Is he doing better?" And the guards, realizing we're about to lead this man to his death, and he's asking about our kids. What's wrong with this guy? He was silent and at peace before God. He trusted God to take care of all of these things. He didn't have to be right because God was right. Catherine de Howick Doherty, the woman who started the Catholic charity Madonna House. I don't know if you know of Madonna House, but they've done great work in this world. And she wrote, "All in me is silent, and I am immersed in the silence of God." To be silent doesn't mean you don't work. She started a worldwide charity that helped so many women. But she understood the value of just being quiet. Because in that quietness, I get to not hear God. Just be in His presence. Like with the wife or the friend or the loved one that I can just sit there for hours and be happy in their presence. This is an exercise. And so, as part of this exercise, here's some things that I would like you to do because once again, calisthenics and disciplines require some things to do. You're going to love these. If any of you did the fasting, you thought, well, yeah, I can do it. It's not great. Oh, I'm going to really scare your liver out of you today. Find a do not disturb me place. Now, this is not the man cave or the garage with all the power tools or the quilting room or the kitchen for anybody that likes those things. This is a place where there's literally nothing. There's just a chair maybe. And this is the place that you go to where people know, family, kids, everybody knows, don't bother them when they're in that spot. You may only sit there 20 minutes, maybe once a week, but find that place and start using it and see what it does to you. Stop worrying about the bills. Stop worrying about what show and game is on that night. Just sit there and worry about nothing. Don't empty your mind and say, "Oh, I'm not talking about that." I'm just saying, just imagine God is sitting there across from you and you're both just smiling at each other, not saying a word. You'll see very quickly that it's kind of uncomfortable. But you'll get to where you can't live without it. Second, live an entire day without speaking. That's going to be fun when the phone rings, isn't it? That's going to be fun when the husband wakes up and says, "What's for breakfast?" Maybe you should warn people ahead of time. And if you can't because you're in a job that requires you to speak, make a commitment to only speak those things that you are required to speak. Now, I want to caveat that. This is not a law that we're following. When someone needs kindness, you speak. When someone needs your charity, you speak. But start disciplining your language that you don't have to just be the life of the party for a day. You don't have to have your opinion out there just for a day. You don't have to correct anything that's not dangerous if they do it the wrong way. Just for a day and see how that changes you. For one thing, I'll tell you what it'll do is you'll realize you don't have to be in control of everything and things will kind of get taken care of anyway. It also changes you in other ways that we'll talk about in just a moment. Withdraw for a weekend and just listen. You know, over here in Missouri, about a 3-hour drive away, there's this resort. I'll have to look it up. It's run by a retired guy. He's got about 20 acres, and there's 3 or 4 cabins on this. They've got electricity, but no internet, no cell phone reception, no TV, just a bed, a desk, a little heater. You can stay there for free. He just takes a free will offering. Pastor Jim Freck over here in Galesburg went there for a weekend. He came back, said, I am the most peaceful I've been in years. What'd he do? Nothing. Just nothing. Be silent for a weekend and just listen. Number 4, try to find new ways to relate to others that are not dependent upon spoken words. You see, when we are always transmitting our spoken words, we have already judged what we think about other people. We've already categorized them and put them into places. If we will be quiet and not speak every word and not be in control of everything, we will begin to appreciate other people for who they are rather than what we think of them or how we label them. So find ways to relate to other people that are not dependent on talking to them. Thomas Merton, we've talked about him before. He says, it's in deep solitude that I find the gentleness with which I can truly love my brother. The more solitary I am, the more affection I have for them. Solitude and silence teach me to love my brothers for what they are and not for what they say. Folks, our country is terribly, terribly divided right now because there's not enough silence. There are people that some of us have looked up to as athletes or politicians that now we despise them because they've been talking too much. And frankly, we've been talking to other people too much about what we think about what they're talking about. Talk. Wasn't it better when some of our athletes were just silent? Some of our movie stars were just acting? Stop pointing your finger at them and think about yourself. It's not wrong to have an opinion. It's not. But God has an opinion, and we've not listened to it. We've listened to ourselves. We've listened to others. We've escalated the opinions into things that you must believe and you must agree with, or you don't belong to my tribe. Well, my tribe is silence before God. I may speak, but God help me if my words stray from His. And the only way I'm going to hear His is by just shut up, Michael. Sit down and listen. Be quiet. And I say, but God doesn't say anything. And He says, yes, that's right. Live with it. Enjoy it. It's peace. Next week, we're going to talk about, 2 weeks from now, we're going to talk about our final subject. It's not the final Christian discipline. It's just our final subject in the series. And that is the Christian discipline of study. I believe the church is dying in America, and it's already died in Europe in many ways, and it can be traced down to the ignorance of what many church people don't know about their own Bible. It's not going to be a lesson on how to read your Bible. That's not what we're talking about. Study is something very different. But until then, you've got 2 weeks to pick one day in which you say, I'm just not going to say nothing all day. And the rest of us will go, oh, yes, thank you. But you're going to do it for good reason. Our invitation song is Jesus, keep me near the cross. I can imagine that if we were actually near the cross on the day of crucifixion, there would be no words. We wouldn't have an opinion because we just couldn't speak. We'd be in so much awe. We would be people that know what's going to happen next around people that don't know what's happening, and nobody could speak because of different reasons. I want to challenge you in the next couple of weeks to have a day in which there is just so much awe of what Christ has done for you that your entire prayer time is silence before Him in appreciation. And let that peace change you into people who are known not by their many words, but by their useful and meaningful few words. Let's stand together, and during our song, if you have something to come forward and be silent about, we'll be silent together. If you have something to say, you can say.